7 past the hour, good time to start Press Pass. My name is Mark Masai. Glad you could join us. This is what's coming up. In honor of the fallen soldiers, tonight we focus our program on the second anniversary of the El Ade attack and, of course, the war on journalism. And we ask, is this a story that newsrooms is still pursuing? And my panelists tonight, we have my good friend and enemy to the mainstream media, that is Patrick Gadara. He is a columnist, a cartoonist, a blogger, and as well as a curator at The Elephant. You should visit that and see the conversations that are going on there. And my senior in the profession, John Gashie. He is a former editor, foreign affairs editor here at the Daily Nation, and has been a journalist, has even reported from the region and on these very affairs that we want to discuss tonight. And Dr. Simiu Irunga, a security analyst who has been on the show several times and has contributed on our news stories on matters security on several occasions. And I appreciate your coming on very short notice, I should say, and I'm glad that we have you available for this, and we are in for a good discussion. Now, today marks the second anniversary of the battle in El Ade, as mentioned, and where an unknown number of Kenyan troops were ambushed by Al-Shabaab militants in a dawn attack. It led to one of the heaviest defeats in the history of the KDF since independence and in the history of our military forces. And here are some of the clues our investigative editor Dennis Okari found on how the attack took place.
It's not the first time Al-Shabaab has attacked a Kenyan military base in Somalia. In what is known as the Battle for Husengo, about 100 KDF men fought 500 to 800 Al-Shabaab fighters in the southern part of Somalia. The year was 2012. The battle lasted 6 hours and Kenya had lost 2 soldiers. It was the saddest day for the troops since rolling into Somalia in October 2011. 5 years later, heavily armed fighters from the Al-Shabaab launched a daring coordinated assault on KDF El Ade base. It was the least expected attack in terms of execution. It took 1 hour and 30 minutes before the first report of the attack came out of Somalia. Communication was down.
At that time, we suspect that the enemy had destroyed the communication systems.
Troops were mobilized from Mandera, El Wak and Wajir as air assets engaged the militants who had escaped with ammunition and military equipment to the surrounding area and town.
The aircraft also confirmed that the enemy had deployed 2 anti-aircraft guns. One was next to a small primary school.
The suicide fighters used 3 vehicles loaded with improvised explosive devices to pass through the first layer of the military base.
We realized that we could not carry out insertion or reinforcement of troops by air. Because of the guns, the anti-aircraft guns that were in El Ade town, next to the primary school, we were not able to assist our troops by inserting reinforcements to that position using aircrafts.
Airstrikes from the Kenya Air Force engaged Al-Shabaab at a place called El Gadoud on the eastern side of El Ade. By day 2, ground troops had started advancing from Damasa to El Ade with resistance from Al-Shabaab. Search, rescue and evacuation operations continued into day 3 when suspected leader of the attack, Maalim Jano, leader of the Abu Zubair Brigade, was killed as 2 camps came under attack from KDF. KDF troops are currently in full control of El Ade camp and mopping up is still in progress. This is expected to be concluded by midnight. Dennis Okari, NTV.
Of course, at the time of the filing of this story, that was in 2016, fresh after the attacks. And yes, getting the boots on the ground in terms of the journalists' boots on the ground, feet on the ground, was a challenge. And afterwards, they would visit such locations having been embedded. And this is one of the issues that we will discuss, because people say that even that, the context and the environment of that doesn't allow for objective reporting on certain operations. So 2 years on, I'll start with Patrick Gathara. I don't know if you're texting someone to give you some historical perspective on this, but you have been on this case over the 2 years. In fact, it's not just El Ade, and on any other terrorist attack, you have been very keen on having answers come out. To this date, what do you feel lingers? One of the most important questions that linger.
Well, I think there's a couple of those. First is to remember is we don't have till today an official report of what actually happened in El Ade. What we had was the initial summation that we got from General Matete in the immediate aftermath of the attack, and he promised that there was going to be a board of inquiry that would go in and we would be given more information afterwards, and since we've had nothing. So we don't know how many people we lost at El Ade. We don't know how many are missing. We do know that at least a dozen or so were kidnapped. One of them, the Shabab said they executed him. But all the information we are getting about El Ade, most of it rather, is coming from the Al-Shabaab. They are the only ones who've actually given us a video, of them attacking the camp, a lot of which raises questions about what Muathefe said. He talked of 3 explosions. The video only shows 1. And even just the way the camp was overrun seems quite problematic. So I think that's the first thing, is we simply don't know for sure what happened and what the effect was.
So let me stop you on
the
that
other thing,
first thing.
I think it's quite important to say this. The other thing that we don't know is whether anybody has been held to account for that. Any of our senior officers has been held to account. We don't know. And the assumption I'm going with here is they haven't, because even after Westgate, we never saw any sort of accountability. I think it's fair to assume if we haven't heard of it till now, it still hasn't happened.
And Bonagashie, as a journalist who's been following such matters, the practicality, there's the ideal situation where someone would be asking for these questions from the Fourth Estate. First of all, is it media's fault that we don't have these answers? We're trusted as a Fourth Estate to give answers to such fundamental questions.
Thank you. I think for me the first issue is really, would we really get the answers in the first place? And if we were to get the answers, how credible would those be? In the sense that in a situation like what happened during this attack, the military have their own protocol about how to release information and how to deal with that kind of an incident. And also they have their own, what we call standard operating procedures as to how to cater or inform, because information, as it is an integral part of military strategy, and indeed is part of that. Am I saying that they should hide? No. I'm only saying that the military, in many ways, in any military, not only Kenya, have their own way in on how they handle that. Now, my colleague here perhaps is saying there might have been, there ought to have been, perhaps an investigation, an inquiry, possibly through the military structures, and possibly if there were lapses, failures, or whatever that
someone to be held to account.
Somebody would be held into account. I think, as it were, the military, again, by its very nature, right, usually handles that internally. Now, I am not in any way defending or saying it is right or wrong. All I am saying possibly is that did the media really, and has the Kenyan media since then followed through?
Right.
And the issues here are really, what is it at stake? And as it were, what's the gain so far in terms of the policy, in terms of the execution of that? And where are we at? And I think those questions are universal within military operations. And indeed, am I perhaps saying that the military should come clear and clean on this? The military will always try to sanitize that information for their own internal issues, and also perhaps, is Kenya, as it were, the Kenyan public ready for the, the blood and the glory of this?
He laughs at that.
Right? And then the other bigger question is, how can and ought the media report this?
If they get the information.
If they get this.
Okay.
Because remember this, very, very, very important, is that what we have right now, the Kenyan military, is Kenya at war, indeed, isn't it?
Right.
And remember, the media, the Kenyan media, any other media for that matter, you must be very careful as to what then you are saying. Are you anti-war or pro-war, or what are you talking about here?
Okay.
Now, there are other, philosophical issues, policy issues. Was it right for Kenya to go to Somalia?
And we'll get to
and all those things.
Right.
But the media must be quite clear and categorical on this one, that Kenyan soldiers, Kenyan citizens, Kenyan people, Kenyan brothers are there. Now, I think it's a very narrow, and as I said, it's a very delicate balance for the media to do that. Mm-hmm. Has the media done its job? I would say perhaps they let the ball down here.
All right. Let me introduce Werunga's perspective on this. And if you may grant us a perspective from a military background in terms of how information is dealt with and why we are where we are in terms of this vacuum. People keep asking for questions, for answers, and they say either someone is failing in giving the information or deliberately hiding the truth.
I think, let me start from the Kenyan people. We, the Kenyan people. One, I believe all these questions are being asked by the Kenyan people because the government did not sell the reasons why we went to Somalia. The government did not give Kenyans the cost for us going into Somalia.
The cost?
And the cost,
okay,
and the cost.
Okay.
You see, every country that prepares to engage its military across its borders will always try to sell the reasons why we are going.
And we saw what Bush did, yes.
The cost why we have to go there, both human, material, and finance, and the cost why we are sending our soldiers to go and fight for us. Now, if you don't sell that thing before you engage your military, then all these questions Mr. Gadara is asking will be asked. But every country, and I want to repeat, will always sanitize, tell its people why it is engaging into a military engagement, whether it is a skirmish, whether it is a war, whether it is a battle. Now, once the country understands why we are going into Somalia, the costs will not be a problem the way we are finding it now. Because we will have understood the costs, and the government will have told us we are going into Somalia to deal with Al-Shabaab. There will be costs in terms of our human fatalities, in terms of money from our economy, and in terms of equipment. And therefore, as a country, be prepared that this is what we are going to encounter. Now, once you sell that idea to the Kenyan people, I think this is where the country failed. And we went into Somalia. A decision was made by the National Security Council. The country was never prepared to know why we are going into Somalia and what costs and the costs for which we are going in. Now, when El-Ada happens and the people start asking questions, it's because, one, they think the government owes them an explanation why they went into Somalia. Of course, generally people will know why we're in Somalia. But the government must give us a reason and give us to understand the costs. Once we know why we are going to Somalia, the rest of these stories Gadara is asking about will be timid within the understanding of the costs that we expected as a country when we go into Somalia. That one was never done. Number two, Mr. Gadari, you'll never get these numbers.
Why not?
That one I want to repeat it. One, there are several aspects you need to understand why these numbers will never come. One, it has a serious impact on the morale of the soldiers in the army, because the higher it is, the more the askaris will start asking, what is it that our leaders are not doing right for us to find ourselves in this course? And any fighting force must have morale. Any fighting force must be made to believe that you are taken care of well, so that in the event of any cost, both human and equipment, the reason is not because nobody took care of you, but it's because these are the costs of the war. So that is one. Number two, information is propaganda, is a tool, is a weapon. So the moment you share this information out, and Al-Shabaab can guess, can give us figures, but so long as that figure has not come from the Kenyan government, they will never use it as a weapon to propagate their successes in Somalia. And then number three is a war, is a battle. You never share your casualties, because that impacts generally on the overall course for which you've entered into that battle. And therefore, from that military perspective, it will be very difficult for any military in the world to share the real costs. And I'll give you an example. When America went to the Iraq, President Bush started receiving the dead in those military bases and whatever. Then quietly, that was stopped. Yeah. But bodies were still coming. Why? Because every time he attended that receiving of the soldiers, the people know how many people were killed. And therefore, quietly, the US started to refuse to go into that direction. And it's not about issues of sharing information. I think we also must understand that in information sharing, and this is about national security, this is about information structures, we have all these levels of the need to know, the restricted information, the confidential information. And when you're talking about national interest and national security, it is not about what we think as Kenyan people. It's about what the system that you elected to represent you feels about our national security. And if information is one of the elements that must be guarded in times of war, then it will be foolhardy for us, even the media, to keep on harping on this, and yet is a practice all over the world.
I really need to respond to this. Very quickly. First, it is really not the practice all over the world to hide casualties. I would urge anybody who's watching now, go to the US Defense website. They've got a list. They don't just have numbers of people who died in Iraq and Afghanistan, updated, you know. They've got the names of who those people are. That's how they honor their soldiers, not in anonymity, not in hiding. They say, these people are there. They died. What you mentioned about people, the coffins coming in, what they did was stop the media covering it. You know, and they were roundly criticized for that decision, because that was simply an attempt by government to protect itself, not to deal with the blowback, the political blowback of people seeing bodies coming back. Has nothing to do with their ability or otherwise. Let me finish. Give me your time. You know, has nothing to do with their ability or otherwise to fight the war. You know, it is simply people covering their asses, and that is what is happening with the Lade. They're not hiding these numbers from Al-Shabaab. They're hiding them from us, because what they don't want is us holding them to account. That is what they're trying to prevent. You know, some of the things that you said, you talked about militaries having protocols to deal with these things. You know, yeah, sure, they do. You know, and I've interacted with some militaries on this, even in Somalia, the Ugandans, the Burundians. And one thing you found was actually one of the reasons that they didn't want to release numbers has really nothing much to do with the fighting, but simply who is actually going to be able to account. The people, the soldiers on the ground already knew that they had lost people. This wasn't something you were hiding from them. They have phones, they have spoken to one another. On the ground, they knew. In fact, one of the problems that AMISOM had controlling the narrative, because that's what it was trying to do, was to control the narrative about the deaths, was that the soldiers on the ground were already texting people back in Uganda, back in Burundi, and saying, your brother was killed. This was, they knew, you know. So my point is, what our army is trying to do is to, our senior officers, is to protect themselves, not to protect our troops.
Okay, let me hold you on that point, sir, if you may allow me to, because my director says, Jackie says I have to take a break at this point, not muting any point. Exactly what he's raised will be responded to by Daktari and Bwana John Gashie. We'll be back shortly. Following the conversation as it's been going on, please write in and send your views on this. Jiruse says it's worth, this is Gashohe Wainaina says, it's worth pursuing this particular story only if the relevant authorities are willing to earn some lessons. Otherwise, if they are still close-minded, then it's a losing battle, micro-analyzing that disaster. My 2 cents is that our security apparatus need to reboot. Governor, the dreamer, you say, please next time make sure all genders are included if possible. Thank you very much for that point. We definitely will. And Derito Mureithi, you say, I still believe that El Ade was an inside job. Plus, I have seen the propaganda video by Al-Shabaab. Quite a well-done video, I must say, and it looks like it was well-planned and executed. Robert Njenga says, what is it that you're reconciling? Unless you're both corrupt and discontent. Okay, this is something else. This is not quite the issue on, yes, this is not quite on what we're discussing. Yes, simply because of many unanswered questions. Why we were defeated in such a manner? Why were we helpless? Did anyone take the flak? And if so, who? Charles Gitonga says very similar topics on KTN News Big Story, and I agree. I actually watched it by Yvonne Okwara, who does a very good job, and I respect her professionalism. And yes, we're not copying each other. This is a national issue of national interest. We need to discuss it, whichever media house, whichever platform, and we'll keep doing that. And Kibi Eliud says, by hiding these numbers, senior officers don't want to raise the citizens' push for their being held accountable for negligence as happened in Uganda. Well, let's continue with the conversation. And Gadara,
Let us make that one last point that I was making during the break, which is that KDF does actually release numbers. You know, for example, they've released numbers of how many people have died in our peacekeeping missions prior to Somalia. A total of that, they have it. It's a UN document. It's about 36 or 38, I think. You know, just in Dennis Okari's report. You know, when they lose 2 people, they have no problem telling you that we've lost 2 people. The problem is when it is a big number that suggests that there is a systemic failure.
Why is this number so important?
The one number is important because it tells us You know, it allows us to see the scale of the defeat, if you will, you know, or even the scale of the incompetence that leads to the defeat. You know, and that is what they don't want. They don't want us to insist that how can we lose 100 or 200 people? You know, when we say, oh, how can we lose 2 people? Well, it's war, yeah. But from 200, then it becomes a bit harder to run away from responsibility.
Well, what do you say with the perspective that was brought in by Dr. Irunga, that also the communication of the numbers as well, we need to be very careful, not just harping on the numbers all through and through, as we are still at war.
Right, but as I said before, number one, there are other armies which are still at war and which give out numbers. You know, the second thing is hiding the numbers. They become really important because we are hiding them, because we don't have a way of explaining them, if you will. But if we were serious about it, if we were honest about it, to say, yes, we got hit. There are Ugandans came out and they said, we lost 19 people in Janale. They held senior officers to account. A year later, they didn't suffer an attack, as we did a year after Elade. We were hit again, you know, by the same guys. And the question is, yeah, in Kulbio, and we lost another 68 people. You know, how is it that we are saying we are winning the war by hiding if hiding does not allow us to fix the problems that are leading to these people being killed?
Right. You mentioned the military world over that mentions, let me just give this opportunity to Bwana Werunga, because he said he'd actually draw your attention to those military bases that actually give the numbers.
Let me tell you this, and let me speak with some insight. You know, when you speak from the press level, you will ask what Gadara is asking. There's a difference between numbers that have happened through one incident and numbers that are continuous. You see, the US, we've never been told, is either been rooted unless it is a terrorist attack on a base. But in terms of fighting continuously in Saudi Arabia, I mean in Iraq, in Afghanistan, we've never been told that they lost 200 soldiers in one day. But yes, they continue losing soldiers, maybe on a daily basis. And those numbers are always reflected in the Pentagon website. This is one incident where you presume, or we presume, we lost quite a number of soldiers. Now, in terms of military operation and war theater, there's a major difference between sharing numbers from one incident that has a serious impact on the operations of the military and sharing numbers that are coming in on a daily basis. And let me speak, I'm speaking this from an insightful understanding of how things happen. So, Gadara can say we have all these numbers. The military can share numbers they lose in peacekeeping missions. Those are normal numbers. You see? But there's a major difference, and I want Gadara to understand it, because we've been here with him before.
Over the same issue.
Over the same issue of numbers.
Yeah, and we have had
there's a major difference between losing in one incident and losing continuously. And that's why I'm saying, if, for example, the Kenya government took time to explain to Kenyans the cost of this war, it will have involved the fact that within this theater of operation, anything like this can happen. Certainly. And therefore, Kenyans should not have expected anything from them, because these are the collateral damages that come about when you are in war. So that is something I'm trying to tell him, that yes, Pentagon does, but it does on a daily basis. They lose 2, they lose 5, they lose 2, and they put it there.
And when they lose 18, as they did in Mogadishu,
no, that is a small number.
You know. So what is this cutoff that suddenly appears that, oh, we're not going to say?
Let me finish. Let me finish. You see, when you understand the configuration of a military, that's when you understand that numbers matter. Yes. You see, there's what we call a section, there's what we call a company, there's what we call a battalion. So you wake up one morning and you have lost a battalion. You see, you can lose 10, you can lose 15, you can lose 20. But you wake up one morning, Mark, and you've lost a battalion. Any country will find it very difficult to share that. Any country. So I'm trying to make Gadara understand, yes, it's important to get the numbers. But in military warfare and theater operations, there's a major difference in losing 1 continuously and losing 100 in one incident.
Where's our place as media in this theater of war?
And that is the issue here. Perhaps I would share interesting insights that I've also had. And one of the first things that you realize is that numbers, cumulatively, or even in total, or in segments, are very important, and they play an interesting role, right? And is the Kenyan military angels or superhuman? No. Do they make mistakes? Yes. Will they lose? Yes. Have they lost? Yes. How? It's another matter. Has the American, the British, the Russians, the Somalis and the Ugandans, have they lost? It would depend on the incident and, the situation. Now, what perhaps I get, and we've had this discussion with Gadara, and a lot of other people here, is that possibly that what happened in El Ade was either a monumental blunder, right? And therefore, then the Kenyan military is running and covering up, and there was a failure. Granted, it could have been, and might have been, and could be so, right?
Isn't that a theme to pursue then?
Precisely. Then, but the question is, when we are pursuing this, we must not lose sight of the larger issue, right? Because even those soldiers that are going, because there's this rotation and what have you, those are Kenyans, isn't it? Really. And we might not perhaps agree with why, the reason deter why we went to Somalia. And I don't want us to get here as to whether that's neither here for us here. The decision was made. How it was managed, that's another matter. And how the public was brought to bear. Good. And as perhaps Sibiu is talking about, how has that been managed? How has the nation been brought along? And the Kenyan media, what is its role there?
Someone watching might say we're actually working with the government.
For me, let me put it this way, Masai here, let me put it this way. Kenyan soldiers in Somalia, Kenyan soldiers in peacekeeping mission, in Sierra Leone, South Sudan, or wherever, Kenyan soldiers in an operation in northeastern or against in Lamu, right? They are, in my understanding, acting on behalf of Kenya.
Right.
Right? And the Kenyan media, indeed, is part of Kenya. Do you understand? And for me, then, and I'll tell you this, the British media, the American media, and wherever have you, anytime there are certain issues that have happened within the media, within the military, and operations and what have you, they are fairly careful before they rush to judgment. When they can establish some failure, they do call, right? And I'm only asking that the Kenyan media cannot be able to see the Kenyan military out there, however much we might not be happy with why they're there or not. They're Kenyans out there. The boys out there, all right? And indeed,
how does that stop us?
Do we then, all right, as it were now, if then we feel there was a failure, command failure, strategic failure, whatever it was, we have to be very careful. Can we now call them to account? Yes, we can. But then, the idea that the Kenyan media is detached, and therefore the Kenyan media has a license to kind of get into what I would call, what shall I say, mockery, or get into enjoying this, right?
Who's enjoying anything?
Because you see, what I'm saying, and for me, and I'm saying we've had this debate with Gadara.
Yeah, that's outrageous.
Because he talked about that the soldiers say, they know, of course. The question we are talking about, are we saying, was there a failure? I don't know. Could we get the numbers? Perhaps we will. Should we follow? What are we following? Is that the Kenyan soldiers were killed? Is it because they were superheroes?
Oh, wait, hold on. Because I really need to respond to some of this stuff. Right. What is the role? Let me ask.
You want to respond to? Okay.
Let me ask. What is the role of the public in military operations? You know, it's not the case that the military is our fire and forget weapon. You know, we just send them and let's forget about them. You know, let them do their thing. You know, because they're the military. Those guys out there are dependent on us to hold their bosses to account. That is our job. You know, because your soldier down here, your whatever grand carrying a weapon over there, doesn't hold his boss, his superior, to account. It is us who do it. What they're suggesting here is let's ignore it. No. We hold them to account. Now, let me finish. If our job is to hold them to account, how do we do it? How do we do it if we do not actually know what they're doing? The suggestion is, let's wait for the government to tell us when they find it convenient. You know, again, that is rubbish. As Westgate has shown, these people are not going to tell us if we don't push for it. The second thing, Kulbio, how many people died? We know it's about 67. What did the government say? It told you 9 people. That was the KDF number till today, 9 people. Why do you think they're telling you 9? Do you think they're hiding it from Al-Shabaab? They're hiding it from us.
Why?
Because they don't want to be held to account. They don't want us doing our job to hold them to account. And I am really not buying this idea that we should be patriotic and sort of beat the drum for them. No. This is what the US media did in 2003. They ended up with a war in Iraq that they shouldn't have had. You know, because nobody would stand up and say what the military is doing, what you're planning to send them there is rubbish, is wrong. You know, we need to insist here that we are not here to simply carry out the narratives that the KDF and the government want us to carry. That our job is to hold them to account.
What do you say to this, Gadara? Phil Mwangi says, kindly ask Gadara to stop talking as if he's praising, celebrating our enemies in disguise. It is not right.
Bloody hell, how is it that when you demand for accountability, when you demand for the information you require to hold people to account, you're suddenly said to be celebrating deaths? I am outraged that the deaths happened. You know,
what of the strategic communication of managing how this is playing out?
Precisely.
What's the strategy? Okay.
The place of strategic communication.
Now, Dr. Arunga said something very, which I totally agree with.
Yes.
You know, that the discussion, the context of this war has never been discussed. You know, and I think it is really wrong that we've never had a public debate as to whether we should be in Somalia, why we went in.
Okay.
You know, and whether we, now that we are in, whether we should
Is
stay.
it too late to have this conversation?
No, I'm glad we're actually having it here. And I think we need to widen it and to have a proper discussion about what we are doing there and what our goals. The second thing that includes is how we are fighting our wars there. And I think we should have a public debate on that. You know, and we shouldn't be in the thing of hiding things. Let us face them head on. We do have problems in our military. You know, everything we have seen since Westgate, Garissa, Elade, Kulbio tells us we have problems there. So let's actually be serious about fixing them, but not sort of sitting back and hoping that the military will do it by itself. You know, this will not happen. It cannot hold itself to account. It's up to us to do it.
To that point where media cannot detach itself from what happens.
I want to take you through a short journey.
All right.
So that we understand the context in which... first, I think the question should not be numbers. The question should be, were mistakes made?
Yes.
Precisely.
So we need to hold these people to account for mistakes made, if they were ever made, not numbers.
But wouldn't the numbers lead to mistakes?
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
We presume we lost over 150, because we've never been given the numbers. As a nation, it is outrageous.
Precisely.
But the question should not be, were they 150, 170, or 200? The question is, how did we end up
in that situation,
losing 150? That should be the debate.
But you just mentioned a number.
That should be the debate. So that if we are asking how it happened, and Mr. Gadara is saying nobody has been held to account.
I'm saying we haven't had any report of anybody being held to account.
Yeah.
In fact, what's his name, Nyambega Gisesa reported that ever since we went into Somalia, no senior officers have been held to account for any of the incidents. That was his report. You know, so if it's accurate, then I think there is somewhere where we have to say there is a problem here.
Okay, I'll tell you this, and this is where maybe, you know, sometimes when you have contacts, you get to know some of these things that does not necessarily get out into the public. When you had the general saying there'll be a board of inquiry, it precisely means that. The results they will not share with you, but I can assure you, men and women were held to account. Now, that is now what brings me back to the same structure of information sharing. Does that need to come out into the public that Colonel Werunga or Captain Werunga was sent home because of El Ade?
Yes.
If it is court-martialed, that one will become public.
Yes.
But there are some things that are done. You take responsibility, you are dismissed, you don't go with your rank,
yes.
You become a civilian, you are never called captain again or major, and those are things that are done within the military. Now, do they have to share that with us?
Yes.
That is a question that we need to talk about Communication Act.
Precisely.
Okay? That one is covered, and I think it's important we know that. Number two, I want to tell Mr. Gadara, the issue that we should be discussing now, the numbers are important, but I think let's ask ourselves, were mistakes made? If they were made, has the government shared with the Kenyan people the reasons why we're in Somalia? Because when numbers are big, it is incumbent upon the commander-in-chief, not even the CDF, the commander-in-chief, who is a politician, but also the commander-in-chief and the chairman of the National Security Council, to talk to the Kenyan people, not to the chief of defense staff, as the technical head of our military. And therefore, we expected the commander-in-chief, who is the president of this country, and who is also the chairperson of the National Security Council, either to delegate that information through somebody to us, but we should not ask the military to do that for us. That is why our democracy is such that our military personnel are subservient to political civilian leadership. And therefore, anybody who deals with the civil populace of this country must be from a civilian perspective. Okay. And that is the commander-in-chief, who is a civilian, a president, and the chairman of the National Security Council. So if these are the questions we need to be asking, do we ask the military, or we ask the minister first in charge, who is the chairperson of the Defense Council, or the commander-in-chief, who is the head of our defense forces in this country? So I think it's also important.
Ask the military. In fact, it's the military that gives us the numbers. When they lose 2 or so guys, they put out press releases, which you receive over here. So it's not the case that they always go and say, let the civilian wait.
No, I think you're getting it. Gadara, let me finish. We give you time. The fact that they do it doesn't mean it's right. So let's be very clear here. The fact that they do it doesn't mean it's right.
Right.
Okay? But I'm telling you the procedure. Even in the US, the Pentagon speaks as a civil...
The Pentagon has its spokesperson.
That is the thing. So the Pentagon speaks, but there's a spokesperson who speaks for them.
Right.
If it is the military that wants to speak here, they'll use the spokesperson.
Right.
Now, in this context of the Kenyan establishment, the commander-in-chief speaks for the military on matters touching on the civil population and the military component. That is how it comes out.
This is not true. Our military has its spokesman, and you've had him here, talking to Kenyans, to people.
You're not getting me, Gadara.
And
I'm trying to say, get my point.
Let
me finish.
His point.
I'm trying to say the context in which I'm speaking for the person to speak to the Kenyan people on this aspect is about the Kenyan people never being prepared on the course for which you went into Somalia.
Precisely.
That education does not come from the military. That information and buying does not come from the military.
So it wasn't the military that decided to go to Somalia.
So that's why I'm saying...
That was a political decision the politicians should explain.
And that's why I'm saying...
I agree.
Yeah, so it must come from the same people who made the decision to tell Kenyans why we are inside there, which was never done.
There we have no argument. That I agree.
And indeed, let me say this, and indeed...
Real quick before we take another break.
Yes, and indeed, the casualties in Al Ade, all right, is not a secret within the military. Do you understand? It's as simple as that. And I say, the captain is, if you lose a company, a section, a platoon, or what have you, you can't hide those numbers. Now, the bigger question Gadara is asking, and I think this is the debate, should then the larger Kenyan public be told that during the Al-Ade, we lost 1 million, 2, 3. And then he goes further, he says, the US, when they have accumulative over a period, but there was never at any one time that I know, and I've covered a lot of military functions and activities, not only here. I've never had the US say that in one engagement with Al-Shabaab, we lost a whole company. No, they do not. Now, is it right? They know. Now, what Gadara is raising, where there, as he says, where there are mistakes made, how have they been corrected? Can the public be told that the officer who, either by omission, commission, failure, either at the top or wherever, action was taken? Now, that's within the military domain. Should the public be told that there was action taken? And as Captain here is saying, that's a different ball game altogether. The media, could we then, as you're rightly asking, if we knew 200, 300, 1,000, 1 million, wherever, could we then say that they did? And I think that is now where we are. Well, the media, could we? And if we were to say so,
could we, should we?
Now, that's a question. And that's why I said, could we, should we, and if we did, in what context? And if we did, right, what are we?
What's value?
What's the value? And the other one, what's the objective? Now,
truth, someone would say.
Wait a moment.
It's accountability. That's
good.
Objective.
Accountability to who? To the Kenyan public? Good.
We fund the military.
I agree. We fund the military. But there is also something very interesting here. Is that perhaps by sharing that information and something else, the same military that you're trying to be, that information could be used. Am I saying we protect the military? No. I'm only saying that we must be able, as the Kenyan media, to distinguish between what is purely military, operational, and what is purely strategy, and what is purely policy. And I think a lot of us here, when we come here, we conflate all those three. And we are conflating them here because we have this, in my view, and I think it's a legitimate concern, that we needed, what are we doing in Somalia? That's Kashara's question. And I think a lot of Kenyans are asking that. Was it worth it? Is it worth it? Should we continue? That's a philosophical question, political question.
Okay.
And I think and I think we need to do that.
All right.
But I'm saying, don't come out here and then you start conflicting all these issues, and then you put a lot of other dangers to a lot of the other soldiers out there because they're already there.
Save that point, Gadara. I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you to continue and ask and clarify after this break. We have the last lap right after this break. Is definitely continuing over the break, and your views are coming in, and I appreciate. You say the military is not a private company that one pushes to a court when disgruntled. Activism and such actions are unknown in the military. And but Mkali, you say, I respect our men and women in Somalia. I don't need to know the numbers of casualties. Media want numbers to report. They are in the business. They don't care about the families affected. We actually do have colleagues who have people who are in the military themselves. So we do. Now this is something else. Let me see one more. Sankey says in the U.S. In Arlington grounds where the national figures are interred and names inscribed, except for special forces, Simiyu and Gashia are being subjective. So, as you say, Gadara is not putting things in context. We are talking about national security. Simiyu Irunga is taking things into context. Not every info is shared. And some might say, and this is the point where you shout normally, let's not focus on the numbers for now. Let's look at the bigger picture. And I know you'll still be on the numbers. We have 15 minutes. We have 15 minutes to go. We have 15 minutes to go.
Right.
When we talk about the blunders, and you've been following the conversation. And there are some reporters and investigative journalists who've been embedded, tried to retrace and see what happened. Okari did so in El Ade, and he did so in Kobio. You can't go there independently, you have to go with them. And with that, has there been good effort to get to the answers? And even with what you keep quoting about the mall attack, many have asked, is it really mattresses that brought that building down? And by asking that simple question, you get an answer, because it makes whatever the cabinet secretary then said.
Sadly, I don't think it's as often as I would want it to be. I think if you ask, has the media covered our adventure into Somalia? Well, I don't think it has. You know, I don't think we've had the sort of debates that the public requires to have about what we are doing there. This the sort of thing that Dr. Irunga is talking about. You know, and I think if the government isn't interested in having it, doesn't stop the rest of us pushing that debate. Now, I understand, having myself worked in Somalia, the limitations that media has in reporting from there. You know, I used to run embeds, you know, for AMISOM. So, and I know you would take them where, what sort of supports your narrative, let me say. You know, you're not going to take them to interview people who don't like you, you know. And there's a reason, you know. So when you're embedded, the military is trying to give its best side. Now, that is not the side, that's not what the public itself wants or should have the full story, should know. Because this is being hidden from them, from the people, because when the public put pressure on politicians, it affects whether you're going to get funding, will the mission be extended, etc., all of these things. So that's what they're trying to affect. So they're fighting different wars on different venues. But the problem is the public then is denied an opportunity to hold these people to account, because it is never actually told what they're doing. It's just shown a side of it, you know. And I think it's incumbent upon our press to understand that and to take what they are told by militaries with a pinch of salt, you know. And so if I give you an example of how international media would report when I was in Somalia, they would have their own contacts, even as far as with people within Shabab, you know, and they'd be interviewing the Shabab spokesman, etc. For that, they didn't simply take what AMISOM said as gospel truth, you know. And I think we've sort of fallen into a rut within Kenyan media of tending to believe what the military tells us rather than question it, you know. And I think we don't, even when we do question it, we don't follow up on it enough to cause these people to actually feel uncomfortable, you know. When one last thing, when the Kenyans came across, in 2011, I mean, I'd been in Mogadishu for a year. And it was interesting the approach that they took, because one of the things we had been trying to do was to train AMISOM personnel in dealing with press and being open with them, etc. But Kenyan spokesmen were telling us, we don't need this, because the media will report what we tell them. That's what those are their words, that the Kenyan media will report what we tell them. You know, and we've seen it time and time again, that our media is reluctant to question what KDF tells it, you know. And this thing that is called national security is always rolled out when something inconvenient happens and they want to silence you, and they say it's national security. Don't question it, you know. I don't buy it, because I know these people have an interest in hiding it when they mess up. You know, they don't want us questioning it.
You were part of helping hide
yeah, exactly. I mean, I've seen them at work.
Bashir, the complexity there of a journalist trying to get the answers.
Let me put it this way. It's never easy for the media to cover a conflict, and in particular a war. It has never been easy. And as Gadara here is trying to make it appear that it is easy that you have, because both sides...
No, I didn't say it was easy.
Wait. Let me say this. Both sides use information as part of war. Do you understand? And therefore, those that on the other side would want to push a particular line, push a particular view, because in the larger scheme, psychological warfare and what have you, it is part of that. Indeed, the problem right across internationally is how the media then should be able to guard against being abused or used, right? Isn't it? On both sides. And remember, the people, the enemy so-called, in Somalia are fairly adept at using the social media.
Very well, actually.
Right? They are very adept at using, because communication is part and parcel of warfare. Now, the Kenyan military has its own strategy. I think the Americans have that. I think the British have. All militaries have a particular way of doing with information and communication. Right? Now, the problem then, in many instances, is that a war for the media is just not a riot. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Is that for you to get to the other side, right? There are two ways you can either do that. You are embedded, all right, on one side, and you have a counterweight embedded on the other side, isn't it? And what you're going to have two conflicting viewpoints. We killed 1 million and we killed 200, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. The question is now, which side is telling the truth now?
If any of them.
If any, mm-hmm. all right? Then the other question is to be able to be supposedly, and I'm using this, supposedly on the neutral, on the side. It is not practical. And that's now where the issues of safety of journalists, and whether then, where journalists, if they are caught up within that situation, are they combatants, are they prisoners, and what do they do? Okay. And when we're talking about then the safety of journalists in covering a conflict and a war, isn't it? It's an entirely different ballgame. Has the Kenyan media been up to scratch on covering a conflict? No. Can they do better? Yes. Do they have, is it a structural issue? Is it a resource issue? Is it it's a combination of all this. Have the Kenyan military, Kenya government taken advantage? Certainly.
For sure.
Right? Have the Al-Shabaab people taken advantage of Gadara?
Yes.
Certainly, yes.
Oh, for me,
just a moment.
Okay.
Let me do
That's
this.
Interesting.
Right?
That's interesting.
Kenyan
government takes
advantage
of media. Shabaab takes advantage of media. I can see where this is going.
Has AMISOM taken advantage? Gadara was used by AMISOM to put a narrative, a spin.
Yes.
Indeed. And what was he doing? What were you doing with AMISOM? You're trying to give the positive spin.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Good. Now, shall we now talk? Now, perhaps you feel that possibly the Kenyan military has not perhaps given you a chance to do a spin?
What the hell? Where does this come from?
Or is it more?
You're suggesting that I'm demanding accountability because I am not getting a chance to work with the KDF. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Then shut up about it. Come on. Those are things you're implying.
What was your point on that?
Those are things you're implying over here.
What was your point on that?
My point,
Speak honestly and clearly. Don't do this insinuation thing.
I'm not insinuating. I'm
yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Let me finish. I'm saying that both parties in a conflict use people in information.
Of course.
Like it or not.
Like it or not. And Gadara and I, and the Kenyan media, for that matter, and the American media, has not been innocent in this.
Right. Bwana Werunga, Dr. Wandia says, imagine sacrificing your life for your country and seeing your colleagues die. Then the media reports less than half that number you saw. You don't want to talk about the numbers that much, but hear this out. People saying we shouldn't give numbers are just being callous to our soldiers. From the military background you have yourself, what do you say to this?
I'll tell you this, and not being unfair to that guy. You know, in this country we have many Kenyans with pedestrian thinking.
Yes.
Just because it doesn't fit their thinking, they think that's how it's supposed to be. Majority of Kenyans lack basic knowledge about many things they speak about. I'll tell you this, no Kenyan, whether foolish, will not be concerned about the death of one soldier. Precisely. One soldier, not even 10. What we are saying is very simple. Numbers do matter. But numbers not matter for us to hold people to account. What matters is for us to ask the question, what went wrong? Who has been held to account? Because if the numbers are big, then a mistake was made.
Yes.
And therefore, we need to hold these people who are in charge to account for this. But I want to bring another spin into this. You see, when Kenya went into Somalia as a unilateral country, we were fairly successful.
Yes.
Because decisions were being made in the field, in Nairobi, OP, and things were being done as a country. We rehearted into AMISOM, which means everything from that moment was to follow the AMISOM procedure. Rules of engagement were determined by AMISOM. That includes how you communicate, that includes how you cooperate, that includes how you work together, and therefore the ball game changed. I will never sit here and defend our military or the police if they are doing anything wrong. But I think it's very important when you have depth of knowledge on what you are speaking about. Now, how does it impact on the Kenyan operations in Somalia? Massive, massive, because there will be no more unilateral decisions made by the Kenya Defense Forces. And that is comprehensive mark. It means even communication systems will follow what AMISOM is talking about. Operational procedures will be AMISOM. Whatever you want to do into that theater of war will be determined by AMISOM. Are we saying we shall not hold our people to account for what happened? No. But we must understand that if you have an insightful understanding of how military operates, and Gadara, I served there for 19 years as a fighter pilot, as a health, whatever. So I understand the theater of war. And when we speak to you, I think it's important you respect people who understand some of these things, as opposed to what you want to imagine.
For you, but
no, it's not me.
My questions. All you're doing is making insinuations
it's not
about
me.
what I know, I don't know,
or
what my motives are or not. You're not answering the issue.
I'll give you an opportunity.
That is good to be a bit disciplined, because we are giving you space.
No, seriously.
Okay, in his defense, he's not from disciplined forces.
Yeah, give us space.
But finish your point. Finish your point. He has his own point, and he has a right to hold it.
And I'll tell you this.
Yes.
Gadara just mentioned here that he was embedded.
Yes.
Can you tell us what embedment means?
He actually helped facilitate.
No,
What is embedment?
I was working on a project that was helping AMISOM with his public relations, public communications unit.
So what is being embedded?
It would be journalists who would come to be embedded within AMISOM, which means they would be staying with us, with our troops. They would be taken around to places to see things. So I'd be in charge of organizing this, and they'd have their questions if they needed interviews with whatever. Basically, they'd be able to come into the theater and move about.
So what you are doing?
Be taken around.
The theater that AMISOM felt right
Let me
and
finish.
safe.
Yeah, that is true. So if you're asking about embeds, I've run embeds. So I know a little bit, about what happens.
What were you getting?
But this idea.
Yeah, because you asked him about embed.
Because when Mr. Gadara tells us that the Kenyan people needs to get to know, and the journalists who are doing their work, they are not holding people to account. And they just spoken that he was training journalists to be embedded. And the question I asked him, what is to be embedded? What are the responsibilities of a journalist who is embedded?
Precisely.
What are the responsibilities of the commander on the ground?
Yes.
What is the responsibility of the head of the theater of war? Because when you take people, journalists, to be embedded, they also go with the responsibilities. The media house must know what are the roles and responsibilities of that journalist embedded with the military. The military will know the roles and responsibilities of that journalist who is being brought to us, and the overall commander will have set the rules. Now, if you are training them to get into embedment with the military in Somalia, that already restricts your thinking, because it limits your space as a journalist, and unless you went there.
I wasn't a journalist when I was there.
No, I'm just saying about the people who are being embedded. And therefore, that plays around also with the issue of how you generate your information to the Kenyan people.
Information management.
And that is why I'm saying, I think from the word go, we started it wrongly. Precisely. If the Kenya government explained to the Kenyan people our course, why we are going into Somalia.
Raison d'etre.
The reasons why we must do it. Even the soldiers going there and dying, they know I'm going there for this cause. Yeah. When my brother or sister goes to Somalia, I know it is for this cause, and we are ready to sacrifice our lives for this cause. The Kenyan government never explained the costs. So even, Mr. Gadara, as you come back and say, we need to hold people to account, nobody in the first place told you why we are going to Somalia, how we are going.
Is it too late to have that conversation?
No, it is not late.
We're
It's
pulling
not
out
late.
end of 2020.
Yeah, but that is an AMISOM program. It's not a Kenyan program. That's why I'm saying anything now that is happening in Somalia is under
we're
AMISOM
already
program.
starting.
Yeah.
I mean, they've already drawn down 1,000.
Yes.
From what I understand, is that was agreed across all contingents that
You're
will
right.
take out bits. So we're already withdrawing troops.
So we are, okay. And in
yeah,
this conversation then, as we conclude, because
Yes.
I'm under pressure, I try to be disciplined. You call for discipline.
No, I need to respond some of
you
the
respond
things.
really quick, Gadara, out of
Yeah.
respect as well as
sorry.
concluding on the issue of then this whole wider conversation of AMISOM.
Right. Very quickly.
Real quick.
First, when I'm organizing embeds, I'm not a journalist. So don't confuse, don't think I was there to report about AMISOM.
Yeah, that's
But
clear.
you are training them
That's
to
okay.
report.
No, I was training AMISOM to deal with the media and facilitating the media to come in and report. And for sure, I had a side, you know. So don't confuse that with what I'm doing now, you know. Second thing is it's important to note that every time they have said about why we need to hold people to account, they keep saying, oh, there's a big number, you know, so there must have been something wrong. So the number does matter.
It does.
But what they're saying is, you should not be asking for it. How then would you know there was a big number?
But
if you weren't asking.
The bigger question is what went
Right,
wrong.
but that question is sparked by the fact that you know there is a big number.
Right.
You know, that is why they're hiding it. Third thing, most important, when Cool BO happened,
A year later, and they told us 9, which they've maintained till today, there's a reason why. Because they don't want the big number that leads you to ask, then what went wrong? That's what they're avoiding. You know, and the fact that Cool BO happened is a direct consequence of the fact that we did not ask questions about El Ade. We did not fix what went wrong at El Ade. You know, and all of these things that keep happening to us, Westgate, then Garissa, 4 guys in Westgate, 4 guys in Garissa, holding off a bloody whole army, same thing in Garissa. It's because we are not asking these questions. We keep being fobbed off, sorry to say this, but by people like this who keep trying to suggest that asking the question is the problem. Okay. It is not. These people who run our militaries and their political superiors don't want you to know this, because they don't want you asking uncomfortable questions. They don't want to be held to account. And for as long as we refuse to do our job to hold him, to insist on asking those questions, we're going to be having incidents like this. I don't like them, but it's a fact. Right.
They're going to keep happening.
Okay. Conclude in a few seconds about AMISOM and what discussion we can have right now.
Well, I think we need to talk about what Kenya is doing in Somalia, what AMISOM is doing in Somalia, what are the benchmarks that we have. I think coming up with arbitrary withdrawal dates, 2020, it was supposed to have been to have started in 2016 before, you know, etc. They keep being pushed back, you know. But I think once we have a clear idea, these are our objectives when we went in. They weren't articulated when Linda Inchi was put in. In fact, the ones that they said were the objectives, none of them were achieved, you know. So I think we need to have a clear idea of what we're doing there. And we need a public debate that leads us to that conclusion. Then that would dictate how we remove, if we withdraw our troops, you know, we should have a discussion on that, you know. And once we withdraw them, what are our options? Do we situate them along the border? Do we, you know, take them back to their barracks, etc.? All this should be the subject of a public debate, you know, and it shouldn't be hidden and sort of it's just to the military to decide or the politicians in parliament to do. It should be all of us participating in a discussion about this and articulating, this is what we think, this is what we want, you know. And once we have a consensus about what we are trying to do, what we are trying to gain, then it becomes easier even for, as Dr. Runga suggested, for the military to even acknowledge when it loses, because then it's within a context that we've all bought into. But sadly, that's not the context we have now.
Wanagashia,
yes,
you've said we haven't been up to scratch, but is it too late to expect something from the media?
No.
And what can we practically expect? Especially, God forbid, something happens again as these grotesque incidences. But even with the past, what has happened? What can we practically expect from the media in terms of information?
Good. I think it's a very good question, Mark. Does the media have the capacity? That's the first one. Does it have the resources? Does it have the professional training?
Is it independent?
Is it independent? Does it have the goodwill? Can it on its own, right, go and cover, right? Indeed. And those are the practical issues here. As Dr. Virunga was saying here, let's be very critical. Covering a war, a conflict, an AMISOM and what have you, is a theater of war. There are processes, procedures, and what have you. And as I having said that both sides to the conflict use information to achieve an objective. Yeah. And that is now where the media, in whatever information that they get, they have to be extremely careful, 3 times careful, to find out who this particular information, who is it going to benefit, gain, or push the agenda. Now,
patriotic, professional?
No. And as I said here, good. Will our military make a mess? Of course they shall, and they will. Will there be more? Of course there shall be. The question is now, and this is a bigger question, what are we doing in Somalia? Because the military are following directives. They were ordered by civilian authorities. Now, that's one. The other thing, are they well kitted? Are they well trained? Are they well deployed? Are they well facilitated? That's another matter. 2, those that have been facilitated, trained, are they up to scratch? That's another matter. Right? And I think we must be able to cascade and unravel this piece by piece. Can the Kenyan media call to account? Yes. Have they done that? Perhaps not, because of structural issues. Structural issues, financial issues, practical issues, right?
Commercial interest.
And perhaps I won't even go to commercial interest. Right now, the nation, if the nation was to perhaps want to send a reporter out there, they must first of all seek clearance from DOD, unless they want to go with Al-Shabaab. It's not so.
That's right.
Not necessarily.
I mean, if they want
to, those who have those contacts.
What I'm saying, if you have to cover, if you have to cover that war, then from both sides, isn't it? You can only be facilitated by the parties, the competence themselves.
The conflict.
The journalists, do you know what I'm saying?
No, journalists can't get in and out,
right?
And
independently?
It's hard, but I know some
precisely, and that's what I'm trying to say.
We know some, many have done it.
And you see, and that is now where the media internationally has had that problem, because covering a conflict is it has the practical, personal security, safety issues, and that war is not a football match. Do you know what I'm saying? That you go to Gor Mahia or you go to FC on the other side. There is no middle ground. Now, then the parties of the conflict use that to then control what information that they want out there. And the media, therefore, should be able to be very cautious of what they get from DOD, and that's what they get from Al-Shabaab. And, right, they need it to be very careful not to be used to either or. Can they do it? Some have done it. Can the Kenyan media do it? They try. But it's expensive, both in terms of money, in terms of lives, in terms, and that is perhaps why now, believe you me, the media is because it made sense now, 2 years, because a good sales story. After Al-Ade, how many people have died between now and then? What have we had? Why is it so important now?
Because it's the anniversary of Al-Ade.
Precisely,
but there was a big number. But yourself said.
Just a moment. There was the first anniversary.
Yes, and we were here.
And we were here. And I'm saying this, perhaps, is that the media, as it is in covering war, right? And when we were here 1 year ago, I used this phrase, the first casualty of war, that is from, nightly, is truth. Do you understand? And the media to sit here to try and insinuate that they have the truth about what happened and they are arbiters of truth and they can access that truth. We're engaging in a futile game. Do you understand?
All right.
And I wanted to say that.
Okay. You've said it. Wanarunga, something that has stood out throughout this conversation is that we got it wrong in terms of the cause and the cost, selling this vision perhaps to the nation. Is it in any part the role of the media?
Now, that I want to answer you this way. You are reading my mind. The first question we also need to ask ourselves, is our media capable of interrogating a war situation?
Imperative.
Is it capable? Why am I asking that? Because, there's something we call journalism in war situations. And we can train. If you have money, you come, we shall do it. Because one, the media must understand the concept of war. Precisely. For it to have the capacity to interrogate a theater of war. For it to have the capacity to know that, yes, here I'm being cheated to write this, but this could be the truth. For example, if I asked Gadara, and I'm not saying you're a journalist now, I'll ask you, I wasn't then. Yes. What is the difference between Kenya in Somalia as an independent country and Kenya in Somalia as a member of AMISOM? Well, what will have changed?
Well, you have command and control changes. Notionally, military is supposed to be reporting to Mogadishu, not to, the ones who are deployed.
In,
doesn't always happen, so the truth is,
the problem is very simple. Even as we blame,
the mandate is different.
The mandate is different.
Right. Even in terms of tactics and war theater, there's something we call time, space, and course. It changes.
Right.
Because completely from a single country dealing in Somalia to a country that is now under AMISOM, and time, space, and course as an element of geographical space. And therefore, when Kenya went to Somalia, it was to repulse Al-Shabaab
at the borders.
When they rehatted into AMISOM, the mission changed to annihilate. No, not peacekeeping. To destroy Al-Shabaab. So those are two different theaters of war.
And to protect
that is the thing. So if, Mark, our journalists had the capacity to understand. I'm just saying,
he's finished his point.
If our journalists had the capacity to understand how to operate in a war theater, it will be very easy for them to be feeding the public. You internalize what you are seeing, you hear what you are being told to report, but you also frame up your own story in a manner that will come out and give Kenyans something that is tangible, but not necessarily giving out everything. Therefore, to me, that's the problem. We have a government that never brought in the Kenyan people to buy in the idea of us going into Somalia. And we have journalists, and I'm not saying all of them. We have a team of journalists that are operating in a war theater that have very basic understanding of what war is. So that, to me, is the biggest problem. I agree with him. Numbers, yes, he's very critical about numbers. But I think at the end of the day, you'll always come back to this issue of what exactly went wrong. And if our journalists were capacitated to understand war and the theater of war and how to operate in a war theater, it will have been very easy. This debate will have been finished the first anniversary.
You should clean up the quotations. I think some people will be calling you.
I think for as long as I know, but for as long as there is a fundamental unwillingness by government to actually have a discussion, and not just about why we went in, but about how the war is being run, and to hold people to account for that, we would still have this debate, even if our media was, because they would be asking questions that the government doesn't want answered. The important thing, I think, to take away would be that we need to be quite skeptical when we hear what the government is telling us, when we hear what KDF is telling us, to ask better questions. It doesn't take training or a lot of it to
be
ask the
skeptical.
questions, you know,
Right.
to be skeptical about this.
And Bonagashia has
Yes,
said that particular point and has made it very clear.
I would say this again and again, that the media can do better. But also, as we are saying now, war and covering a conflict, a theater of conflict, is a long-term thing.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not a quick fix. And it's not really that. Will we suffer more? Of course. Will we lose more? Of course. Will there be areas that the Kenyan military needs to up its game? Certainly. Have we gotten? I don't know. What is the debate we are having now, Mark, here?
Okay.
I mean, should we have gone to Somalia in the first place, perhaps? And I think that is now, that's a debate for a different matter altogether now, isn't it? It's more a policy issue. And I think a lot of us are using the numbers to go at why did we go to Somalia? Because of the numbers. Yes. And I think it's a legitimate.
It's a legitimate point to go.
But I think now the key question is, what's the mandate? When do we draw back?
Okay.
And what is it that we gained? And can we resolve this?
All right. I think it befits this conversation to let someone who's been in the ranks to give his appreciation to the military as we wrap this up.
Yes, I think first, even as we speak, we need to appreciate the fact that our military now is war savvy. They are now used to fighting a war. They now understand the theater of war. We must thank them and we salute them for the work they're doing. We know families are losing their loved ones, but they're there for a cause that maybe was given through mission statements and mission orders from their military personnel, but a cause that should have been shared with the Kenyan people so that they understand why we're in Somalia. We salute them. We thank you guys. We shall support you, but we shall also be a bit critical when things go wrong so that we ensure that this country has a fighting force that we have now, and our soldiers in battle have morale.
Right.
And within space, time and course, we should fit them with the necessary equipment, equip them with what they need to have, and also ensure that their welfare is taken care of. But we salute them for those who have died posthumously. I think the government should have given most of them honors instead of giving a Githeriman. Those are the soldiers who should have been given those things.
Well spoken.
Yeah, so that we have posthumous commemoration, I mean, what do you call it? Decorations for our soldiers who died in Somalia, so that even those who are here, they know that the government recognizes us and the Kenyan people recognize us. Right. We salute you.
And I believe you also speak for Gadara as well.
This
is on a serious note.
I totally accept that.
Yes.
I totally agree that they should, I mean, the ones who are deserving should get commendation. Yes. The reason why they don't give commendation is because we can count how many commendations they give.
Thank you. We really have to wrap it up.
Perhaps we should say this, that the Kenyan media really needs to really have the debate as to what are we doing in Somalia, and possibly is it about time that we reconsider. Can the media pick that one? You owe it to
Can
Kenyan.
You join us on that panel?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
All right, there we go. And I'm sure Gadara will be there as well.
For sure.
As many people are saying, he can't be removed from the Presspass panel. You're always here, and I appreciate your support on this. He's very critical on various matters, national matters, and we appreciate that. Thank you, Gadara. You're having a conversation on this online on Thursday?
On Thursday, yes. We're going to be
hashtag.
having a tweet chat. Hashtag is
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Yeah.
And that is the
We're
elephants.
going to have an edition on the elephant.info.
Yes.
Covering this. So
one of our contributors, Raznawara.
Yeah, Raznawara, Paul D. Williams is writing a piece. I'm doing a piece as well.
Okay.
Helen Epstein is also writing.
You should probably ask him
can I do a piece?
contribute.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There you go.
Sure.
All right. And as we look for opportunities to get a job done. Thank you, Gadara. Thank you. Thank you, Senior. Thank you, Senior, and thank you, Captain, for that. We salute you, the soldiers out there who are, protecting our country. And yes, many questions need to be asked, and we will continue asking them when and if we have the reason to do so. And there's a lot of reason over the past few years. Thank you to my team behind the scenes who have been standing by. Thank you for watching and for the contribution. My name is Mark Masai. Good night. Salute.